To our weekly media avail for the House and Senate Republicans. I'm Kim Wirtz. I'm the Communications Director for Senate Republicans. And today I will turn it right over to Senator John Braun, leader of the Senate Republican Caucus. We're also joined by Senator Keith Wagner and also J.T. Wilcox, leader of the House Republican Caucus, and Representative Chris Corey. Take it away, Senator Braun.
All right, thank you, Kim. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning. I'll be relatively brief so we can get right into your questions. Here we are in week 2. Our priorities really haven't shifted much. We still are very focused on public safety and encouraged somewhat that we have a lot of interest in bipartisan support for addressing the Blake decision, for addressing the pursuit issue, strong support for working to increase the number of law enforcement officers around our state. So I think there's some reason for optimism that we're going to get some real solutions that actually improve public safety across our state during the session. A lot of work to do yet. On affordability, I think we still have a lot of work to do. I think the place we see the most promise right now is in housing, where there are a lot of ideas out there, some good ideas that I think ultimately could get bipartisan support and have meaningful impact on the affordability of housing across our state. But the devil is in the details, and you can easily do harm in housing as quickly as you can help if you get the cost proposal wrong, if you don't understand what you're doing to people who are actually building houses. The thing I will say, and you've heard me say it before, is this is not a problem the state can solve by itself. We have to engage the private sector. The math just simply does not work otherwise. We can't get there without a vibrant private housing sector in our state. And right now we have too much pressure from overregulation on that sector. And the last thing I'd say is, you've heard me talk, is the third priority is education, primarily focused on learning loss for our children across the state. This is an issue that I'm pleased to say I believe is getting more attention and people are taking it seriously. What we're going to do about it, I think, remains to be seen, but people are understanding that we have to get after this. And in the longer term issue, how we structurally fund our K-12 public education system, I'd like to think that's getting attention, but that's a longer term effort to make sure that we're not falling behind on the state's responsibility to fund basic education. So no real surprises there. Still the top issues, lots of other things happening, of course, but that's where we're focused in week 2 of this legislative session. I'll turn it over to my friend and colleague, Representative Wilcox, to speak about what's going on in the House.
Well, thanks very much, John. And, we've begun to see some hearings take place, so that gives you an idea of what the majority's priorities are. It seemed in the first week like there were a number of things that we were talking about along similar lines. It remains to be seen whether action will line up in that way. I'll remind you, a year ago, there was all kinds of verbal agreement in the week leading up to the session that we were going to address emergency power reform. But when it came to legislation, the Democratic leadership was much more timid. One of the things that it sounds like we agree on right now is workforce training. You've heard everybody talk about this, and I was happy to see that Representative Maycumber's apprenticeship bill that has over 50 co-sponsors, by the way, was introduced in committee yesterday, and I think had a really good hearing. You've also seen all 5 corners talk a lot about public safety. I'm glad to see Democrats, including the governor and both caucus leaders, agree that mistakes have been made. At least I think that's the implication, and that we have further steps to go, especially in the areas of Blake and also pursuits. We have Republican bills that will fix the pursuit issue without a lot of other complication. I hope that those get advanced. But we'd support Democratic bills that also eliminated all the confusion that is there regarding when police can give chase. The bottom line, I think, in much of this is that we need more police on our streets. And you'll see House Republican legislation and our efforts on budget committees reflecting that need. More law enforcement means less crime, better resources for de-escalation, safer outcomes, and more community policing. we're also talking, I think, in fairly mutual terms about the housing crisis. You're seeing some pretty substantive bills come forward, and the hearing process will show where we need to adjust those bills. No bill's perfect when it is first dropped, and I think that there is a lot of excitement around the joint approach that's taking place in the House, the bipartisan approach that's taking place in the House, and also I think a little bit of trepidation because these are big moves. And I would encourage all parties, including the press, to be part of perfecting these bills and not feeling like the sky is falling because there are some things in the initial drafts that don't seem perfect to you. I'm also very happy to bring along my House Republican colleague, Representative Chris Corey, who is serving for the second time as an assistant floor leader in our House Republican leadership.
Yeah, thank you, JT. Just want to talk a little bit about some of our priorities that we're seeing around fiscal responsibility and helping Washington's working families. I sit as ranking on consumer protection and business, and one area we're really focused on is licensing review and reform, removing barriers to entry into the workforce so that people looking to get jobs in a variety of fields that are regulated by the Department of License can access them easier and without unnecessary restraints to making a living wage. We're promoting some property and sales tax relief. Representative Abarno on the 20th has introduced a bill to repeal the long-term care tax that is set to go into effect this year, and it's probably one of the biggest concerns I'm hearing from my constituents. Is it going to be delayed again? What are we doing? Our priority is to repeal it. It's not a working program, and we don't believe it's going to be working in the future. So the best bet is to stop it before it has a chance to harm any Washington State residents. Additionally, on the fiscal responsibility, sitting on appropriations, we've had a chance to hear the governor's budget, and it's another large increase, another 10%. So we're up to $70 billion. Again, over double the budget it was 10 years ago. And we're looking at that type of a budget going into arguably a tough economic cycle. And so instead of seeing fiscal restraint right now, we're seeing continuing to press the gas on spending. So we're going to have some concerns there because we can't afford to continue this year-over-year spending without any real relief for Washington's working families. Happy to answer any questions, obviously, as we move forward.
And I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Senator Keith Wagner, who will also be joining us today.
Thank you, John. I don't think I'm going to add anything new to the conversation. I want to reserve this time for the media so they can answer questions. I represent the 39th Legislative District, which is a mostly rural district. Looks a lot like what you see behind me sometimes. So,
All right.
Joe O'Sullivan with Crosscut. I've got a question on legislative privilege, just as I'm getting a better understanding of how this works. We don't have a lot of information. I haven't seen any policies released on it. The most I have to go on is the legislative preview a couple weeks ago and some of the remarks made there. Is it to Senator Braun, Senator Wilcox, when we talk about legislative privilege, this is something that can be invoked by an individual lawmaker on their own records, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Can they? So for example, Senator Braun, if you hear that Senator Wagner has some emails and you think it's going to be messy and not good, you can't go and redact his emails citing legislative privilege. Is that a correct interpretation?
I believe so. That's not something we do. So, I could tell you also that I know there's a lot of interest in this, but neither, and JT can speak for his caucus, but the use of this has been either zero in public records requests in my case, and most of my caucus requests are very minimal. The cases that have been kind of high profile here all came from the majority caucuses, and it's a little frustrating, I would tell you, at least from my perspective, that we're lumping all legislators and caucuses together as the press talks about this, when in fact we've been very forthcoming in sharing records with this. I made the point that I think Legally, this does exist. There's good record in our state and around the country that this exists, but it exists in a very small form, and many of us, most of my caucus, choose not to use it, and certainly haven't been involved in the very controversial uses of it in recent months.
Well, that's partly why I'm asking, because I've gotten the redacted House records. There's at least one House lawmaker. The person's in the other party, and they've told me that they did not assert legislative privilege on their own records, and they don't know who did. They don't know if it was another lawmaker. They don't know if it was a legislative staffer. So just to confirm, that's not a practice that's being done by the Senate caucus or the House caucus of Republicans, correct?
Joe, I've looked into this a lot because there's been so many cases that you've brought up that were unknown to me. And what appears to be happening is in the House, and I think the two chambers are going to be different in this, is that there's a process where records that might be eligible for redaction are identified. And then it appears that the option is offered to the member. And I get the sense that in some cases, well, I want to be really careful about this. It's very unclear to me right now whether or not there is a positive approval of the assertion of privilege or if it becomes a default. And I thought I knew that yesterday, but I've heard some other cases today. I'm happy to have your questions because I want to get to the bottom of it as well, because a whole bunch of this was happening in ways that I didn't understand, and I don't think were very clear to the members.
Okay, I appreciate the response. One more thing, just as we're here, and I'll get out of everybody's hair. I do want to say that I've started submitting waivers of legislative privilege that were granted to be my lawmakers to House and Senate public records officials, and I fully expect to get unredacted copies. Because this is the basis for understanding is legislative leaders saying that lawmakers can invoke privilege and then they can lift privilege. And I'm saying this here and in public because I don't want to get some answer from records officials saying, oh, no, we can't have that. We're not going to give you the records for some sort of technical reason. It's the expectation of the press that when lawmakers lifted their privilege, that we're going to get those documents unredacted.
Joe, this is Senator Wagoner. I appreciate you contacting my office on this issue, and I hope you've gotten all the answers that you expected out of our office. This is something that, at least in our caucus, has been rarely, if ever, used to my knowledge. And that doesn't mean we don't have the right to use it in certain cases where we're protecting privacy and health issues of constituents. But in general, it's been our caucus position to not take that privilege if we're just like trying to avoid embarrassment or somebody has said something that they wish they hadn't have said and put in print. That's not the intent as I understand it. It's actually the intent of legislative privilege is to protect constituents and others who could be harmed by the release of the material.
Appreciate the responses.
All right. I will jump in and start inviting other members of the press to ask their questions. I'm going to start off with Jerry Cornfield from the Everett Herald. Jerry, did you have something that you wanted to ask the legislators today?
Sure. Let me just ask two quick ones, I guess. First, on vehicle pursuit, Democrats have introduced two bills. I think they have some Republican co-sponsors, both one in the House, one in the Senate. Are those the legislative vehicles, you believe? They both talk about a reasonable suspicion. I mean, they go back to where the bill was at the end of last session. So I want to get to see if those are the ones that your caucus can support at this stage. And secondly, on housing, hearing coming up on that 1110 bill with middle housing, what are you hearing from your cities? Is it a split decision on whether this is the right policy or not?
Well, I'll start out on the vehicle pursuit. You might be thinking about 1363, which is a bipartisan bill. Representatives Rule and Robertson, House Republicans would support that bill. I haven't heard a commitment on the part of Democrats to do a rollback like that. I hope they do. I think that everyone is sensitized to the danger that can be involved in pursuits. They're also super sensitized to what happens when people feel like they can behave with impunity and they can't be pursued. I think we could end up in a better place than we started if we passed 1363.
On pursuit, I think that I feel confident that we're a pursuit bill similar to the one passed last year in both chambers introduced. There'd be votes, overwhelming votes to pass it on off the either floor. Certainly I can talk about the Senate. The question is, how do you get it to the floor? And I think that vehicle is most likely going to be a Democratic bill. We're still working through how that makes it through Law and Justice on the Senate side.
And Jerry, I think you also asked about the middle housing bill. I think you're seeing a ton of support and a fair amount of comment about perceived flaws. And some of the cities are on the side of perceived flaws. We care about the people in cities that we represent. We have had some city council members, I think, sign in support as well. And this is the first step for that bill. And I think this is one of those bills that should pass in the end, but needs perfection. And I welcome the process.
Jerry,
Yeah,
did you have a follow-up?
We're in
I'm
largely the same. I addressed the middle housing real quickly. We're in largely the same situation in the Senate. And I think it's a split. This is something that we have Republicans signed up on the bill in the Senate. I'm signed up on the bill, as in fact, but we do get conflicting feedback from our districts. I haven't personally heard much from my cities yet, but I expect I will after saying that publicly.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up will be Drew Mickelson from King 5. Go ahead, Drew.
Good morning. Thank you all for making time for us. Wanted to get a reaction from you all on Representative Clyde Shavers being added to the Veterans Committee. This is a new member who misrepresented his military past. It's gotten some attention. Your reaction, and should this committee continue to have him on it?
Well, just a reminder, he didn't only misrepresent his military background, he also claimed to be an attorney when he hadn't passed the bar, and perhaps some other things. So I think it's very serious. I've certainly heard from Democrats in the past when they had ethical objections to House Republican members. And when it was appropriate, we addressed it. We didn't go putting them on the very committees that they had offended.
Yeah, I think as the other of the Naval Academy graduate on this panel this morning, the tact that Representative Clybur's made was very disappointing. But I'm more concerned actually about his residency, whether or not he actually is in the district that he's now representing. Also sit on the Veterans and Military Affairs Committee, and we'll be working with him. So I'm hoping that we can, if he continues to stay on that committee, we can find some common ground and maybe work together. But it's disappointing coming from an institution that our core values does not lie, cheat, or steal. My classmates have commented wildly on it in social media.
Drew, did you have a follow-up?
I do not. Thank you.
Next, I will go to Claire Withicombe from the Seattle Times. Go ahead, Claire.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having us. I wanted to just ask about, there's some chatter that a wealth tax could be introduced at some point this week, and I wanted to get your all's reaction on that proposal.
Well, Democrats introducing new taxes. There's not anything very unusual or newsworthy about that. I think we've passed a dozen new taxes in the last couple of sessions. I think the fact that we've had the fastest growing budgets in the history of our state show that there's never enough money, and that there should be no one in Washington who feels safe from the desire of some person in one of the Democratic caucuses to tax them.
Yeah, excuse me. If I can just add to that, I also believe that they are looking at lowering the capital gains tax, which was promised to be only for the wealthiest among us. But now I'm hearing in a bill, I believe it's Senate Bill 5335. I could be mistaken on that. I'll double check, but that they are looking to lower the capital gains tax down to a much lower threshold, which will impact a lot more Washingtonians. Again, 2 years ago when this was originally passed, it was only going to be for those super wealthy people that could afford to pay it, and no surprise, we're growing it so that more Washingtonians can pay into it.
Yeah, I'll just say, as Representative Wilcox said, there's no surprise that this is being introduced. That should come as a shock to no one. We'll see whether it goes anywhere. I would just reinforce that there's not a need for this or any sort of new tax or tax increase that the majority Democratic parties want to introduce. Our budget is a very sound budget, very robust budget. We are in a position to with current revenues to even provide some tax relief and still pay our bills, maybe even expand programs. We should be looking to work within current revenue or even reduce current revenue, not expand revenue. There's no financial justification for adding more taxes in our state. This doesn't make any sense.
As a co-chair of the tax structure work group, this is one of the things that is coming forward out of the tax structure work group, but I can guarantee you I did not vote for it, nor did any Republicans on the tax structure work group. However, the numbers are such that it is going to come out as a recommendation nonetheless.
Great. Claire, did you have a follow-up question?
No, thank you.
Okay. Next, I'll go to Laurel Demkovich from the Spokesman. Go ahead, Laurel.
I wanted to ask about safe staffing. The bill that's up this year doesn't set specific ratios like the one that came up last year. Is that something that anyone in either of your caucuses support, or do you still have concerns about it, especially, or is that something you support, especially given workforce issues, or are there still concerns on your end?
Laurel, I missed the first part of your question. Are you talking about the staffing ratio bill?
Yes, safe staffing. With
So I know this is not something our caucus is supporting. We recognize there's a staffing issue in our hospitals for nurses. As some of you know, my wife's a nurse, my middle daughter's a nurse. I'm pretty familiar with the profession. There's absolutely a need for more nurses, but just saying we have a ratio won't drive that. What you'll see is you'll get nurses. Either you won't meet the ratios, which is what they saw very specifically in Oregon when they tried this and it failed, or you'll pull nurses from other places we need nurses, like long-term care, and which just exacerbates the problem. Absolutely, we should be focused on solving the problem, the challenge of providing adequate nursing coverage in our hospitals and other places, but this is the absolute wrong approach to do it. I think that's well documented. The only place right now that really does this is California, and you can see by the quality of care metrics, which are very, carefully done, that they're not doing better as a result. Our goal ought to be to improve the quality of care, and this isn't the right way. I don't think I'm confident Republicans won't support it, and I'm not sure they have full Democrat support for the bill.
Hi, Laurel. I would echo a lot of that. I don't think that we're going to have much support. I will say this, though. The nurses have been very successful in drawing attention to the fact that one of the challenges in healthcare staffing is the fact that so many of the occupations in healthcare, although they've gotten more lucrative in some cases, have become extremely difficult for people to stay in. And that is a problem that we have to find solutions to. The challenge is we need to find solutions that don't, in the end, make it harder to staff. And I'm hoping that the parties that are most concerned in this, the healthcare organizations, it's not just hospitals that are suffering from a huge shortage of staff, and the nurses and the other caregivers can find a way that's less confrontational and more collaborative because any one of us could be a victim of the staffing shortage that we have right now.
Yeah, and just to add, I know a lot of us represent rural hospitals, and we're uniquely facing this challenge. I know I've got hospitals in my district that are having to close entire departments because they don't currently have the staff. So when you apply a top-down statewide mandate, you're not going to keep the doors open out here. It's going to make it harder for us. Additionally, there's other challenges that are impacting how hospitals are staffing nurses, whether it's traveling nurses, and how that works in our state. But again, top-down approaches from Olympia tend to have a lot of negative consequences and don't actually fix the problem they're looking to fix.
I just say one more quick follow-up is I talked about why this won't work, but the things that will work. The nursing compact bill that allows folks nurses to come into our state and license more easily. That's a simple request that really makes a difference and has been done by many other states. The loan repayment plan for nursing, which just dropped, it's a good way to encourage folks to get into the profession. And then you may already know this, but we've worked and we need to do more work to expand nursing programs in our state, both at our state universities. We added, we funded last year in the budget adding the nursing program at Eastern Washington University, which is a big move. We can do a lot more in our community colleges in their nursing program. So there's a lot we can do to build this workforce. That's a much more positive and effective way to get after this problem than to add yet another administrative requirement that is candidly unachievable.
Laurel, did you have a follow-up?
Nope, I'm good, thanks.
Okay, great. And I think our final question today comes from Elena Perry, also from the spokesman.
Yes, hi. My question has to do with a bill recently heard by the Senate Labor and Commerce Committee regarding the employment of people who lawfully consume cannabis. I was wondering if I could get your thoughts and potentially your position on this bill and how it potentially could intersect with the workforce issue.
You dropped. Say which bill you're talking about again, please.
This is the bill that has to do with the employment of people who lawfully consume cannabis. It's Senate Bill 5123.
Yeah. So what this bill, I don't know that everybody's tracking this bill exactly. What this bill is just limiting how testing is done prior to employment to make sure that folks who have lawfully consumed cannabis are still considered for employment opportunities. Yeah, I'm not sure where this bill goes. It's a real problem. I acknowledge that, but it's a problem on both sides. Employers are testing because they have very rigorous and strict safety requirements they have to maintain and they're responsible for in their workforce. And they know that someone who is under the influence of drugs or alcohol could be a hazard to themselves and others in the workplace. That's a very thoughtful and responsible approach. At the same time, it is true that current testing does not distinguish between use, a week ago or a month ago and a week and use the morning before you came in to submit your application. So I think the issue here is less a legislative one and more a technical one. It seems to me that folks who are in this industry who participate in the use of the products ought to be very interested in improving our testing so that we can show without a doubt that if just because you legally use cannabis, that you're not impaired when you come to work. So I acknowledge the problem. I'm not sure this bill is the solution. And I think we'll get a lot of debate about where we go from there.
Yeah, I'm glad this one was brought up. It's something that I've thought about for a long time, having been around, employment and especially around a lot of transportation when the feds require extensive testing as well. And the real challenge is one challenge is exactly what John says. You don't have a way of distinguishing whether someone's impaired or not impaired at the time they're on the job. But, as long as the employer has immense liability for incidents that may happen on the job, it seems to me you can't, simply tell them that they can't test effectively. They're going to assume a huge liability You know, if that was relieved, maybe then you would relieve the liability of testing. But John's point that this should be a technological fix is absolutely right. That solves both problems.
Did you have anything further, Elena?
No, that was all I had. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. That'll conclude our Media Avail. And thank you to the legislators as well. And we will see you next week. Thank you.